Following a visit by a Chinese special envoy to the DPRK, can we hope for any progress at all on finding a solution to the DPRK's nuclear crisis? And as a tit-for-tat battle emerges between Russia and America over the status of news outlets in the two countries, are we seeing a reversion to Cold War days between the two countries? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. The Minister of the International Department of the Chinese Communist Party's Central Committee, Song Tao, has wrapped up a three-day visit to the DPRK as a special envoy for Party General Secretary Xi Jinping. Song Tao is the highest Chinese official in 2 years to have visited Pyongyang. According to the official website of the ministry, Song held talks last Saturday with Ru Su-yong, Politburo member and vice chairman of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea, or WPK. The day before, Song Tao also met Chow Ryong-hae, member of the Politburo Presidium and the secretary of the Central Committee of the WPK. Song Tao briefed the two DPRK officials of the outcome of the 19th CPC National Congress, besides exchanging views about relations between their parties and countries. Few details were given out, and it was not mentioned whether the topic of the nuclear issue was discussed. Now, before Song Tao left for Pyongyang, U.S. President Donald Trump tweeted, "China is sending an envoy and delegation to North Korea. A big move. We all will see what happens." So, what was Song Tao's trip really about, and what possible ramifications it's going to have? Joining me for the discussion are Zhao Hai, Research Fellow in the National Strategy Institute at Tsinghua University, and Professor Bernd Schaefer, Global Fellow in Wilson Center from Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Professor Schaefer, now Song Tao's visit to the DPRK was made after the 19th CPC National Congress wrapped up, also after the visit to China by U.S. President Donald Trump. What do you think is the purpose of China sending, or the CPC sending, a special envoy to that country at this moment?
I think the meeting as such is not so special because it's right after a party congress, and actually he was also meeting, as I understand, with the communist parties of Laos and Vietnam, as well as North Korea, so it's basically a party-to-party meeting. But I think it's significant because for the first time in 2 years you have a high-ranking official of the Chinese Communist Party going to Pyongyang, so it might be the beginning of further communication and high-level talks. But at this point it's still too early to say whether this is more than just a cordial visit. But it's significant because it's for the first time in 2 years, and maybe party-to-party relations might be followed by state-to-state meetings between China and the DPRK.
Zhao Hai, what is your take on this question? What do you think has been the purpose of Song Tao's visit, and also what do we know, what do we not know, because very few details were given out?
Yes, I think Professor Schaefer take this on the right way, because number one, this is a routine tradition between China and other socialist countries to exchange ideas and to open up communications after party congress and other major political events to inform each other about the recent developments. Some people take the different sequence comparing to the last 18th party congress. China first informed North Korea, and then Laos, and then Vietnam, and this time we informed Vietnam first, and then Laos, and then North Korea. However, taking into account that President Xi Jinping is going to Vietnam for the APEC meeting, and then after that paid a state visit to Laos, I think the sequence is not that important. However, I think on the one hand, this is a routine and we shouldn't read too much into this. However, I think clearly Minister Song Tao is taking President Xi's message and convey that to North Korea leader Kim Jong-un. That's one of the reasons I think probably President Trump is tweeting that tweet. He has this idea that China would ultimately give his idea and his message back to North Korea.
Before we move on, let's clarify this detail. Do we know that whether or not Song Tao met with the top leader of DPRK, Kim Jong-un? Professor Schaefer, what is your take here?
I'm not aware of any facts regarding any meeting in this regard. I don't know about that. And I don't know whether we know about it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Zhao Hai, of course, this is a very secretive matter. What about the Chinese side? Do you have any better idea?
Well, other than public information available on the website, we don't know anything so far. However, people can only guess whether or not Kim Jong-un take the time to meet with Minister Song Tao. We, of course, hope that he met with Song Tao and Song Tao delivered the message directly to him so that the nuclear crisis would be reduced, the tension could be reduced.
From the level of the two, from the ranking of the two DPRK officials that Song Tao met, what can we read? For instance, how much importance does the DPRK put in receiving this special envoy from China, Mr. Zhao?
Well, I think if you look at the list, the two people, vice chairman of the Workers' Party in North Korea, Choi Long-hai was the one who visited China, represented North Korea in 2015, participated in China's victory parade. So he is definitely a personal representative of Kim Jong-un and also the high-ranking official that is responsible for North Korea-China relations. So I think it's critical for him to meet with Minister Song Tao first. In addition to that, Vice Chairman Li's visit and also meeting with Song Tao is also very significant because both men met with Song Tao is a signature, is a signal that North Korea is very paying a close attention to this visit and the message contained.
Well, Professor Schaefer, as we said at the beginning of the program, President Donald Trump tweeted that meaning that he has high expectations for this visit. How can we tell whether anything could have been achieved or will be achieved in the days to come? What signs will you be watching out for?
I think we should certainly watch closely whether there is additional communication, public communication between China and North Korea, whether it's made public that there will be additional meetings. And as we just heard, obviously leader Kim Jong-un was definitely informed in detail about the meeting of the Chinese minister with the high-ranking DPRK officials. So we can only hope that from there we will have further communication between both sides, because this is important in this entire situation. And then we might have at some point even some communication also between North Korea and the United States, maybe mediated by China, because this is the crucial point in all that. At some point there has to be some communication between North Korea and the United States as well.
Now, as the impasse continues surrounding this issue, now China has promised to abide by relevant UN resolutions, including restricting trade on coal, iron ore, textile, as well as oil with that country. So relationship between China and the DPRK have been at their lowest since a long time. Mr. Zhao, do you think we can expect Song Tao's visit to help turn things around in the near future?
Well, I must point out that not only China's relations with North Korea is at probably an all-time low, but also North Korea's relations with other countries are deteriorating in the recent days. For instance, Singapore just declared it's going to cut off trade relations with North Korea. So I think the United States is putting pressure on other countries in the world to put pressure on North Korea. So that's one of the strategies that the United States is conducting. However, on the other hand, I think this visit shows that China still keeps an open communication channel with North Korea, and hopefully that not only the UN security resolution, the pressure put on North Korea can take effect, but also China's persuasion and reason can take effect on North Korea's thinking about their nuclear and missile programs.
Professor Schaefer, how realistic it is for us to expect Mr. Song's visit to the DPRK to bring about any decisive breakthrough in the development of the situation?
I think at this point it's not realistic as long as we don't have any other indication that this is just the opening to further channels of communication. It's a good sign, but it's a very low beginning, so we still have to see more. Again, as I said, ultimately there has to be also some sort of communication between North Korea and the United States, probably mediated by China, because just the bilateral communication between North Korea and China is probably not enough to achieve a solution here.
And Zhao Hai, given the current state of bilateral ties between Beijing and Pyongyang, how much sway do you think Beijing have over this issue? And is it likely that the limited influence Beijing has could actually diminish even further?
I think, as you said, China has really very limited influence over North Korea, and a lot of analysts in the West are taking this influence of China over North Korea too much. However, with the limited channel, China can still communicate and trying to exert influence on both sides, not only North Korea but also the United States, trying to bring two parties back to the negotiation table. So right now, what needs to be happening is, on the one hand, for the North Korean to soften its basically threshold of talk between North Korea and the United States, and on the other hand, for the United States to take in seriously a consideration on China's dual suspension or double phrase proposal.
Dr. Schäfer, very briefly, do you think these possibilities are anywhere near in sight?
It's absolutely speculation at this point. Of course, we would all hope it would go in this direction. Let me also say I would hope that at some point North Korea is going to take up the offers made by the South Korean government to have some inter-Korean dialogue. As long as we talk, we don't have nuclear tests, and I think this is a progress, but we still have a long way to go.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Professor Bernd Schäfer, Global Fellow in the Wilson Center, joining us from Washington, D.C., and here in Beijing, Zhao Hai, Research Fellow in the National Strategy Institute of Tsinghua University. And my first point here, now Chinese Special Envoy Song Tao's visit to the DPRK this weekend as a special representative for General Secretary Xi Jinping clearly demonstrates that despite a deterioration in relations between Beijing and Pyongyang, there are still open channels for communications between the two countries. It is clearly important for Beijing to keep those channels open and effective. It would be too much, though, to expect Song's visit to make any decisive changes in the development of the situation, because the fundamentals of the problem haven't changed. I've said this before, but it's worth repeating once again. So long as the US and the DPRK don't make any effort to get closer to one another, things would barely improve. With the two sides reduced to trading insults, there is hardly likely to lead to anything positive in a diplomatic way. And Beijing cannot and should not be expected to find a solution to a problem that is basically not of their making. You have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this. Russia's Justice Ministry said last Thursday that it has warned several U.S. government-sponsored news outlets that they could be designated as foreign agents under a new bill which has yet to be fully approved by Russia's upper house and signed into law by President Vladimir Putin. The bill comes in response to the U.S. government decision to force Russian state-backed RT to register as a foreign agent. Russian President Vladimir Putin has harshly criticized the U.S. move as an attack on freedom of speech and had warned that Russia would retaliate. For months, Washington has been accusing Moscow of having interfered in the U.S. presidential election in 2016, and the latter has repeatedly denied the allegation. RT and Sputnik are among the organizations suspected of working on behalf of Moscow in its alleged support of then Republican Party candidate Donald Trump. So how serious is this rift between the two countries, and why did the U.S. use its Foreign Agent Registration Act, which dates back to the 1930s and has rarely been applied to media outlets in this way? I'm pleased to be joined from New York by Dr. Simon Adams, Executive Director at the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect, and from Moscow we have Pavel Felgenhauer, a Russian political and defense analyst. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Now, Russia's Justice Ministry said Thursday it has warned several U.S. government-backed news outlets that they could be designated as foreign agents under a new bill, as I said. Pavel, what would such a move mean in practice to the affected news outlets?
Well, actually, it's not fully understood yet. This legislation was drafted very swiftly, and there's human rights activists here in Russia say that it's not fully thought through, that any kind of foreign news outlet or even Chinese CCTV could be declared under this legislation an agent. Most likely it won't, but anyway. And again, this legislation just simply equals news outlets to Russian NCOs, and they are, of course, very different. So what will happen in practice is not clear. Most likely there's going to be some kind of level of increased scrutiny that these Voice of America and Liberty radio stations and others affiliated channels will have to provide more detailed financial reports. But on top of that, it's not clear, I mean, how really it's going to be implemented and who is going to be under it. It's a very sweeping legislation that they can sweep the authorities anyone they wish under it. Will they or not? Most likely not. So this is a kind, in Russia it's called a kind of a mirror reaction to the Americans, but nothing further than that is really fully understood.
Yeah. Dr. Adams, maybe you could help us understand a little bit better under the U.S. administration, under that act, what would it mean in practice to have somebody registered as a foreign agent instead of a media outlet?
Yeah, thank you. Look, I mean, it's a difficult situation, and I mean, I'm not American myself. I live here in the United States of America, but there's obviously a large part of the political establishment in this country who kind of see themselves in a strategic clash with Russia. And the most obvious part of that is all the speculation around Russian interference in the American elections. But I think now media has become a casualty of that strategic clash. And I think that's unfortunate. I mean, I'm one of these people that believes in open societies and believes in a free media everywhere in the world. And I think the designation of RT as a foreign agent has led, of course, to this mirroring, as my colleague just said, in Moscow, where they're now looking at how they can crack down on media organizations. This is coming on the back of course, a number of legal prohibitions that have been put on NGOs and other human rights organizations in Russia. So I think it's a sad reality of the world that we live in, that this dispute over the news, what is fake, what is real, and who's interfering in what way behind people's sovereign borders has become such an important topic here in the United States and in Russia too.
Well, one of the points that people have been arguing about is whether or not freedom of expression has been infringed upon. A lot of the criticism has been that by having RT registered as a foreign agent, this is violating the press freedom. Even the OECD representative for press freedom has called out this act unacceptable and calling on both sides to not do that. However, the U.S. Justice Department representative has said this is not an infringement on press freedom, because by registering as a foreign agent, they can still publish pretty much anything they want to. So exactly, without limiting the content that they can publish, what is the negative effect here, Pavel? What is your understanding?
Well, there may be, let's say, there's maybe increased pressure to provide more detailed financial reports on how they spend money, how they pay, how much they pay to whom. That could put additional expenses on the American-funded news outlets in Russia, and on RT and Sputnik in the United States will also have to spend more money to write more reports. But there can be more than that. If you're branded as a foreign agent, you may be not given accreditations. Officials may decline to speak to you. There could be other different kind of inspectors coming about fire safety or something else. I mean, getting a lease for a correspondent studio. I mean, there's many ways in which authorities can put pressure on the news organization. Again, right now, it's not clear how far American authorities are going to go against Russia Today and Sputnik, how far Russian authorities will go against Voice of America and others, and will there be an expansion to cover other news organizations, European, Asian, Russian actually. Again, it's not clear. The legislation is vague, and its implementation will depend on what the Russian authorities decide to do. Mm-hmm. But they can put a lot of screw on any news organization, that's for sure.
Dr. Adams, your take on this question?
Yeah, look, I think it's symbolic, isn't it? I mean, I think the American authorities wanted to point out that they don't see RT, that they don't see Sputnik as real news organizations, that they see them essentially as propaganda outlets. I think it's a clumsy move, I've got to say, myself. I mean, RT has a tiny share of the American market. What I mean by that is the number of people who actually watch RT in the United States is very, very small. So I think people are voting, if not with their feet, then with their remote controls and simply switching to other channels. And I certainly believe in the diversity of media. And as I said, I think the purpose of it was to kind of brand them in a particular way, but I think it's probably a very clumsy move.
Well, some people are, the suspicion, as I said at the beginning of the program, of this segment, is that they have been, RT and Sputnik have been suspected of playing a role in the alleged meddling by Moscow in last year's U.S. presidential election. The interesting thing is we haven't had any conclusion except the fact that they have been seen as having played an important role in that alleged meddling. Pavel, what is your response to this? I mean, taking such a move even before the investigation come to any well-founded conclusion?
Well, Russia, of course, has rejected any such notions, and it's not really clear if Russia, apparently, that their officialdom and most of the media in Moscow did very much hooray the election of Donald Trump as president. That's a fact. But did really Russia play a major part in making Donald Trump the president of the United States, of kind of influencing the American people? That is very, very, very questionable from any kind of point of view. And of course, officially, Russia rejects it. But right now, Russia is going to have presidential elections in next March. And so now the Russian authorities say that the West is trying to intervene in Russian elections and influence the Russian electorate. And so that now the Russian authorities will take action to quell any kind of Western influence on our elections, and there's going to be, this legislation most likely is just the beginning. There's going to be other legislation to put more pressure on any kind of people who are seen as in any way connected to the West. So this is a kind of downward spiral coming from both sides, and it's going to make relations between Russia and America, Russia and the West, much more complicated than before.
Dr. Adams, what is your take on what Mr. Pavel's prediction now? Are we seeing potentially a new Cold War between the two countries?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with many of his comments, and I think the media is an area where this is playing out, and I think it is a bit of a race to the bottom in that regard, and I think that's very, very sad. I mean, I don't watch RT that much myself, because I think that, and I certainly don't get invited on RT very often, because I don't think what they would like what I would say about Russia's role in Syria and its complicity in war crimes there. But that's a separate question. I think, you know, people should allow free media to operate, whether it's in Russia, whether it's in the United States of America, and allow people to make up their own mind. So as I said before, I think this is a clumsy move, and it does represent this kind of tit-for-tat between Russia and the United States at the moment, locked in this
hypothetical
kind of
question
strategic conflict. And I think, you know, that's a sad thing.
Dr. Adams, I would like to ask you a hypothetical question to wrap up. What if it has been proved, okay, maybe it is not possible, but what if the investigation proves that RT or Sputnik have really played a role in helping meddle the U.S. presidential election? Do you think it would justify putting them as foreign agent or banning, as Twitter has announced, you know, any ads that they sponsor?
I think that would be a game changer, and I think it would also change the way that many people in the United States of America see things. I mean, again, I live here in the United States. I live in New York City. When the news about RT came out, I think most people just kind of shrugged. They didn't really see it as a big issue one way or another. I mean, if it was eventually proven that RT had played a role in electoral interference in the United States of America, then yeah, I think that would be a game changer in terms of the ways that people see these moves.
Okay, we have to go. Thank you very much, both gentlemen. Simon Adams, Executive Director at the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect, and from Moscow we have Pavel Felgenhauer, Political and Defense Analyst. And here is my last point, my opinion. Although the U.S. Justice Department says the move will not limit the content that RT or Sputnik publish, the stigmatizing effect is quite significant. As U.S.-Russia ties have already sunk to new lows, it was clear that such a move on one side would invite a strong reaction from the other. The media feud, as a victim of worsening ties, will work to deteriorate relations even further, as the need persists for Russia and the U.S. to work on normal footing for international hotspots. Such a poisonous atmosphere could have larger regional or even international repercussions. That's it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. We've got The Point.